This episode is brought to you by Hushmail.
Hushmail and Hush Secure Forms take the guesswork out of secure communications by providing encrypted email, web forms, and e-signatures all in one package. During a time when limiting contact is necessary to protect our clients' health, using secure email and web forms to communicate is more important than ever. Now's the perfect time to move your paper forms and PDFs to HIPAA-compliant digital forms that your clients can easily fill out. You can send them through secure email or put them on your website.
Hushmail has a special offer for all listeners of the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. So be sure to stay tuned until the end of the episode and find out how you can start using Hushmail today.
This podcast is also brought to you by Kelly and Miranda of Zynnyme.
Do you ever wish that there was someone who could really tell you what the right path is for you in private practice so you could avoid wasting time and energy and get to what you love? Helping clients? Kelly and Miranda of Zynnyme are two therapists who do just that. They don't get you cookie-cutter solutions that work for some people. Instead, they teach you a process that works for everybody.
Be sure to stick around for the end of the episode to get free access to over 10 hours of free private practice trainings, including their Marketing Masterclass COVID edition.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhalm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy, and occasionally we talk about money on this show, and we've made it very important that everybody know that we like money. Money is a good thing to have. Money makes the world go round. And today, to join us in talking about this is Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, financial therapist and also Therapy Reimagine 2020 speaker, here to help talk about financial anxiety, the way that money plays in and out, and both the clients' lives and therapists' lives. So thank you so much for joining us, Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you here and to have you on our conference. Woohoo! I'm so excited. The first question we always ask is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Yeah, well, as Curt mentioned, I'm a financial therapist and my company is Mind Money Balance. And it was created to hold space for folks who wanted to talk about money in the therapy room beyond just budgeting, right? So many of us understand that, yeah, a budget or planning for retirement, those are mildly important things, but also it's the emotional and psychological stuff that comes along with money that most of us therapists are just not trained on. So for me, my background is in social work. The only training I got on money was in a death and dying class when we talked about like DPOAs and wills and trusts, right? So that was like the most we ever talked about money. And so I wanted to be able to provide folks with a place to talk about money in a safer space.
So we have moved this question up in our episodes around, and this is really for learning from some of other people's mistakes. And you're pointing out that there's just not very much training for most therapists on talking about money. How do most therapists end up making mistakes in talking about money with clients? And I imagine that there's probably just like several hours of content just in that question alone. But
yes.
How do therapists make these mistakes?
Oh, this is such a good and hard question because you're right that I could go on and on. I would say some of the biggest reasons that clients come to me once they're already in therapy and they are referred to me by their therapist, usually what I'm picking up on is a therapist's discomfort in talking about money with their client, right? So like we've talked about, we're trained on other stuff. So you can see a trauma therapist, you can see a sex specialist, you can talk about some of those hard, uncomfortable things. But since us therapists don't get training on money, when money gets brought up, we all have our own biases and our own lens in which we bring to the therapy room. So if I'm a therapist and I think $50,000 is a ton of money and I've got a client who's complaining about making six figures a year, that's going to shape the way that I interact with them. And it might inadvertently cause some additional shame or hardship, or that therapist might shut their client down because we aren't trained to talk about it, we aren't really ready to have these conversations. And again, only speaking from my training as a social worker, I was trained to advocate and refer when money stuff came up. Okay, you're struggling with your money. Great. Here's an 800 number of a financial counselor, which is different than a therapist, who can help you consolidate your debt, right? But you're not allowed to talk about money in the therapy room. So we get these messages that can totally mess with our clients, and it's not purposeful. I don't get the sense that therapists are like, you can't say the M word when you are in session with me. It's more that they just don't know how. So when I get a lot of clients coming to me from therapists, it's because they've tried to engage in the conversation and it becomes abundantly clear that that therapist has their own work to do and or discomfort with money. So they refer them to me.
I would imagine that there's also a misunderstanding that can happen if you've either not struggled with budgeting or having enough money to make ends meet on one end as a therapist, as well as not really been very financially secure and had salaries or those things over over the six figures. And so I think that just a lack of awareness paired with no training, it sounds like there would just be at best, just avoiding it. But at worst, it sounds like there's some shame, there's some misunderstanding. There's a lot of those things. And I think for me, and I end up getting a lot of executives because there's a lot of therapists that have not done, worked in the world or those kinds of things. And so therapists just don't get it. And so then they're like, how do I talk about work when people are like, oh, I have no reference for what you're talking about. But there's also this issue around bonuses. And there's this issue around, is this worth pursuing? Is it not worth pursuing? I have a client that I was talking about that's like seeking a bonus. And I was like, well, is it worth going to a lawyer or not? And he's like, well, yeah, it's not a ton of money, but it's a good money. And I'm like, it's more than a lot of therapists make in a year. And so there's this notion of just not being able to have that conversation at that level. And then there's this third piece in the background, or maybe it's a second piece. I don't know how many pieces we're at this point of, if I start talking about being worried about money, my finances, and I'm private pay, is my therapist either going to want to jack back up my sliding scale or lower my fee? And then as a therapist, do I bring it up? Like, there's also the fact that there's money being exchanged most of the time with the clients that you're working with. And so then there's this additional element. How do you even dig into that?
Which part? There was a lot there.
There was so many parts. Yes. I guess let's start with the part that I think most therapists are going to resonate with, which is this idea of, if my client starts talking about money and hardship, do I need to then go to let me slide my fee or let's work out something, those kinds of things? Because I think a lot of therapists immediately see it as their problem to fix versus being present with the client around the money issue.
Which is so fascinating. It's such an interesting reflex that us therapists have, which is, let me lower my rate. Let me do it pro bono. But if somebody came in with an eating issue or a sexual dysfunction issue, we wouldn't say, let me actually help you with that by, we're going to practice eating in the session, or I'm going to monitor your food. We wouldn't get so involved in a way that's a little bit inappropriate, right? But again, us therapists are trained. The message that I got all the time in school was that you're not here for the money. You don't do this because money is important to you. Yeah. So we've soaked up these beliefs. And even if they're not beliefs, we've heard these messages enough that they leave some sort of bruise in us, which is that good people don't care about money. So if you're interacting with your client and they're saying, I'm struggling financially, one of the first things we do is say, okay, well, I'll waive my fee. But we wouldn't do that for any other problem coming in. We wouldn't say, okay, well, we will totally be
struggling with sex. Let's have some sex right now.
Ding, ding, ding. Exactly. So, thank you. Thank you for going where I was trying to go in my head. But that's exactly right? Why do we have healthy boundaries in other ways? But when it comes to money, we're totally dysregulated ourselves. And I think the other thing that's interesting, Katie, is that's another big misconception that's kind of buried in your question, which is, you can only struggle with money issues if you have a lack of money. And we struggle with money issues regardless of our socioeconomic status, right? It cuts across the board. When I tell people I'm a financial therapist, their minds inevitably go, or like what I hear is, oh my gosh, you have to talk to my cousin. They're so bad with money, right? Mm-hmm. But it's rare that I get somebody who says, oh my gosh, I'm actually making a really comfortable income and I'm really still struggling with my relationship with money. We should talk, right? That just doesn't come up. We have this understanding that the only people who are allowed to have issues with their money are people who are experiencing a lack of money. So that's the other kind of thing that I picked up on there. Yeah.
Oh, and I want to add to what you're saying is that this permeates our profession in a way that a lot of the training and a lot of the guidance that we have comes from this place of privilege, that therapists are financially well off enough to enter into the profession that it's assumed that they have enough money to be able to exist. And that there is an inherent bias from the way that we don't talk about money that is a stance of the profession in and of itself, that money is this bad thing that we, kind of hold these old school beliefs around, don't talk about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. And we are the only mid-level or higher healthcare professionals who are told not to make money, right? I've got lots of family and friends who are nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, also mid-level healthcare providers like us mental health care workers, and they aren't told they better slide down to pro bono. When they graduate, they usually hear things like, congratulations, you're going to make a really good living, right? Yeah. So it cuts all over the place. So like, I don't know why mid-level healthcare providers in our field are told we should work for pennies, whereas others are told, good for you, you're making a good living for yourself.
We've talked a lot about on the podcast around kind of therapists being told that they shouldn't make money. And so I do want to shift, because I think that that's a symptom of some of the stuff you're talking about. But I want to start getting into what the work could look like should therapists grapple with their own money issues and actually are solidly in the place where it's okay if I make a lot of money and I don't need to immediately slide my scale. But I think looking at this idea of across the board, we're all going to have some financial anxiety. There's going to be money issues at every socioeconomic level. There's going to be conversations that have nothing to do with the therapist that the client actually needs to really process and grapple with. And I think one of the myths you talked about was this idea of only people who have a lack of money need to talk about money. But what are some of the other myths? Because I think for therapists who basically run away from talking about money, they're going to miss a lot of this stuff. But I want to really start digging into the treatment of money issues in the room where therapists are getting out of their way.
Yeah. So the most disappointing thing that I tell therapists is you already know how to do this work, right? We already know how to hold space for tough conversations. We already know what happens when we sweep things under the rug. In fact, most of the time we're telling our clients, we're kind of helping them get to a place where they don't have to walk on eggshells, where they don't have to hide from scary conversations. And to me, money is another one of those things that if we plug our ears and shut our eyes, we think it's going to go away. And we want to model for our clients that it might be a 10 or 15 minute sweaty, uncomfortable conversation with your partner. And that's going to help move you forward. So I think if we look at the skill set that we hold, whether we are working with couples or individuals, the same thing goes if you were talking about anything else that feels uncomfortable or scary. And so a lot of therapists get, I don't want to say triggered, but they're like, dang, I thought you were going to tell me, which is what therapists love to do, that I have to go get a certificate to be able to talk about this stuff, right? They're like, well, tell me how many CEUs I need before I can talk about money in the therapy room. And I'm kind of like, you already got the skill set. You just have to start practicing getting comfortable with it. And it's like anything else. We've all had clients who are struggling with legal issues. We don't ever offer legal advice, but we talk with them and hold space for them in that area. So it's the same thing with money. I'm never going to say to one of my clients, here's an investment that you should definitely buy, because that's unethical, right? It's outside of my jurisdiction. But I will say, like, let's sit with this and we'll work through it and we'll talk about it. But we are all skilled at being able to have these money talks with our clients.
One of the things that you had talked about when we had spoken before the show is this idea around money archetypes. And I have to imagine that people's interpretations and how they even come up with these myths and these anxieties kind of stems from this place where therapists come from. Can you tell us more about these archetypes?
Yeah. So these financial archetypes were modeled off of Dr. Brad Klotz's. He calls them like the different money stories that we have. And his research has been around money dysfunction. So it's about the things that we do poorly or badly with our money. And so that helped to provide a little bit of a roadmap for what I've seen in my office, but I'm a strengths-based practitioner. So I don't like to look at things just from the dysfunctional side or the unhelpful side. So I have pulled from that and my own work to go, what is a more well-rounded archetype of the folks that I see here in my office? And these archetypes are more or less solidified by the time we're about 10 years old, right? No surprise that we have our beliefs about money imprinted on us when we are children, just like we have our beliefs about everything else imprinted on us when we are kids, right? I was trying to give an example and I'm like, oh, everything.
Yes.
So it comes down to these 4 different categories that most of us fall into, again, with the caveat that we are not robots. We're not neatly going to fit into a box, but most of us more or less resonate with a set of beliefs that shape how we engage with money. And the beautiful thing about an archetype is we talk about kind of the challenges of it. And then we also talk about what are the strengths that fitting into a particular archetype can lend a person. And because I do a lot of couples work, this is really helpful at giving people language and validating what's going on with them and what's going on with their partner. It's just like any other type of psychoeducation where we can say, oh, there's actually a name for this. You're not alone. So I use those as a way to help create conversation and language so my clients have something to kind of point to and hold on to.
So I'm very curious, what are these archetypes?
Yeah, so they are 4 categories, kind of in 2 sections, and you'll get what I mean when I kind of go through them really quickly. So they are blissfully ignorant, admirer, doomsday prepper, and spender. And 2 kind of avoid the money and 2 kind of run toward the money. So the folks who run away from the money are the blissfully ignorant and the doomsday preppers. And the ones that run toward the money are the spenders and the admirers. And I'll just go through really quickly kind of what it might look like. And again, the statements that I'm going to say are a little bit bold because it'll just make sense when I go through them. So a person who falls into the blissfully ignorant archetype is going to find themselves agreeing with statements like, good people shouldn't care about money. It's selfish to have more money than you need to survive. It's rude to talk about money. And how that particular archetype could shape a person is that they avoid talking about money. They don't want to look at it. They get uncomfortable negotiating for a raise or talking to their partner about it. They close their eyes and just hope it'll work itself out, right? So we can see the challenges with that. The admirer is the person who tends to find themselves agreeing with statements like, if I had more money, life would be easier. Or if I just got that raise, things would be better. Or my life would be better if I had more money. So they're kind of on this hamster wheel of chasing more money, thinking that the money will fix things. And then when they get to that next level, going, shoot, where's that next level? Then for the doomsday preppers, these are the folks who we like to call frugal or penny pinchers, or if we're not being nice, we just call them cheap. So these are the folks who tend to agree with statements like, I'd be a mess if I didn't have money saved for an emergency fund. I won't lend money to anybody. It's rude, or it's not rude. It's bad if you take handouts from people, financial handouts, right? So they tend to agree with those statements, and they tend to hold on tightly to that money because it provides, in their minds, a sense of security. But the drawback there is they may be so focused on like, cutting their sponges in half to save a nickel that they forget to enjoy life. And then the final category is the spender, which is pretty self-explanatory. This is different than the admirer in that the spender likes what money can buy them, where the admirer likes the idea of having money. So the spender is the person who has a hard time showing up to a housewarming without a gift. They are always finding themselves buying brand name items or looking to like upgrade their devices. So that's a very, quick rundown of those archetypes.
I'm not seeing one that's like perfectly at ease with money. Is there an archetype that's like just blissfully at ease with their money? They don't spend too much, they don't save too much.
No. So what I will say is once you do your work, you can find a way to find balance within that archetype. So for the blissfully ignorant, who's the person who doesn't want to look at money, it kind of makes them cringe. Once we do some financial therapy with them, we can lean on some of the strengths that come from that archetype, which are, having values that tend to be charitable or like caregiving, right? And so we can help them learn how can they cultivate those values within that archetype, or how can we learn how to log into your bank account without spiking your anxiety through the roof? How can we create a system so that you look at your money monthly instead of, once a year when taxes are due? So there are ways to dial down some of that intensity so you can get in better alignment with your money.
So I imagine many listeners are jumping to identify themselves into one of these archetypes. Just, like I'm imagining people sorting hats like Harry Potter as to which house they go into. When you've talked about using this with couples and couples therapy, how does that play out? You're labeling, okay, you're the blissfully ignorant, you're the doomsday prepper, this is why you're both miserable. How does that conversation really play out?
It is surprisingly fun because what tends to happen is because we do it together, we do it out loud, we go through. So it's not like they go and like fill out a piece of paper and then come back and I do a big reveal. We do it together. We go line by line. We go, okay, how much do you agree with this? How much do you agree with that? And we kind of do a big reveal. And it is, to me, it's so fun to watch these couples because what they do is they go, oh my gosh, that's totally you, right? They go, oh my gosh, you're such a spender. But what it does then is it helps that person who's pointing at their spouse and saying, you're a spender, go, oh, now I know why you're motivated to spend. So then we dig into like, how does a person become a spender? Well, a person could become a spender for a million reasons, but I'll give one example. An example may be that they grew up in a household where they heard all the time that they couldn't afford certain things, or, the shoes that the neighbors had were so nice. So they grow up kind of internalizing that if I had nice things, then things would be better, right? So that helps the partner who isn't the spender to empathize with where their partner is coming from and to be able to identify their behaviors as something more than just quote unquote being bad with money or having money burn a hole in their pocket.
I would imagine that some of this work should couples be planning ahead would be great to do kind of premarital. Right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. That would be my dream, is to get everybody financial therapy before they get married.
And so to me, I guess there's a lot of things that come up around, do we merge finances? Do we become debt free prior to getting married? Like there's a lot of these things that potentially require some additional knowledge around how money works. What are your recommendations for when people are having those kinds of conversations where there's potentially different archetypes or disagreements where like, okay, we're going to come together permanently here, or at least the goal is to be permanently together. Like, how do we do that?
Yeah. So there is definitely a little bit more training in financial social work and in financial therapy that helps a financial therapist gain a little bit more financial literacy. But I will say that most of it is stuff you can pick up in a personal finance 101 book, right? Yeah, I did not sit to become like a CPA or become an investment advisor, right? It's pretty basic knowledge once you kind of gather it. So when it comes to that specific question of like, what do we do with our money? I tend to do, again, what a lot of us therapists do, which is say like, here's a menu of options that have worked for other folks. Why don't you guys try one that works for you? And I almost always say the one that works for you is going to be the one that you can stick with, the one that feels good. But I find for most of my couples, having shared money helps to say we're in this together. Yeah. And also providing some space for a little bit of autonomy. Like, I don't want to text my partner if I want to go get an iced latte, right? I want to be able to purchase that and not have to come home and show somebody a receipt and say like, is this okay? So there are, I'm getting a little technical, but I don't think it's bad. I think there's basically 3 ways you can kind of set up joint money or decide to merge your money or manage your money rather when you get married or seriously partnered. And it's, everything is ours. That's one option, is we're all combined. Another option is everything is separate. I mean, I know couples who have been married for years who still Venmo money back and forth. That would drive me bananas, but it works for them. Great. And then the third option is theirs, mine, and ours. So most of our money is merged, but we each have a little pocket of like a checking account or something like that that is separate. And we walk through those and kind of play around with what feels best. But yeah, those are the options I tend to lay out for folks.
And I think the piece that comes to mind for me is that there's things that go beyond even the money archetype that probably come up in that conversation. For example, people who are independent and have wealth ahead of time, there's different things that might play into that conversation. And if you avoid that conversation, you're not going to look at potentially gender role issues or looking at, kind of who's making more money, what percentage should go into the shared account. Like, there's so many different pieces that are logistical. But there's emotional impacts. And to me, I feel like it would be really challenging to understand a relationship if you leave money out completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why with the money stuff, what tends to happen, the pattern that a lot of couples get into is they avoid talking about money until they absolutely have to, right? So child number 2 is born and we need somebody to stay home. It's no longer sustainable. Or, oh my gosh, you got a job offer across the country and we're moving, right? That's when we tend to talk about money. When emotions are already high, you're already running on fumes, things feel very intense. And then we try to talk about money, like forget about it, right? And then what happens is this couple says, see, anytime we talk about money, it becomes an issue, which is why we don't talk about it. Yeah. So I love folding in. So I assign all of my couples money dates, and that's exactly what it sounds like. And it's not as boring as it sounds, I promise you. But usually I start out by saying you have to have weekly money dates. And once you get used to having weekly money dates, then you can have monthly money dates. And once you get your monthly money dates down, then you can graduate to quarterly. But having it on the schedule as something you are going to talk about is hugely important and just helps to fold it into a natural part of your relationship.
I imagine being as the therapist, hearing these other people's conversations and guiding them through it, that you're sitting there and just kind of being like, man, I am so glad I have my things figured out, but...
Or not, right?
Or not.
Exactly. As most of us therapists ended up here for a reason.
But this also goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning of the episode of, for a lot of people who are graduating tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, who are putting life goals behind, and whether it's getting married or buying a house or things that are going to potentially, just push all of their life goals back several years, and having these conversations, how do you suggest that therapists deal with that countertransference that goes on in the room? Obviously, doing the work outside of the office, but in managing that, you don't want to, I guess, show either your privilege or your inadequacies in these sessions with clients when you're not coming from that same archetype or that same socioeconomic status with them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like a lot of things with therapy and that it just takes practice. For me, I find it hugely helpful to have my own therapist and to have kind of a support group of other peers who are in therapy. The tricky part is that there are so few financial therapists, so it's hard to find a supervisor or a group that specifically works with financial therapy. So while I do get supervision and I am in therapy myself to help with those types of issues, I will say it's a little bit more tricky than finding a trauma therapist or a trauma supervisor.
I think the piece that I'm curious about, because I'm assuming that people probably consult with you or those kinds of things as therapists who are trying to sort their own stuff out so they can do it right in the room. What are the ways that shows up, for therapists? Like, what are the things that they recognize? Like, oh no, I just screwed up in this room. I'm feeling a lot of feels, or maybe I didn't even screw up. Maybe it's I'm out of my depth here. Like, what are the things that you see most commonly that therapists are kind of bringing back and saying like, oh my gosh, this is super hard?
It's hard because I don't want to be throwing any therapist under the bus. So what I would say is we are not trained on this stuff. It makes sense that you're going to stumble and make more mistakes in this arena than you might in others, and give yourself the same type of compassion that you would when you're learning a new skill set, when you're learning a new intervention, right? Where you're like, I think I just fumbled it, but like, what am I going to do? And your supervisor basically tells you like, you know, neuroplasticity, we're going to be fine, rebound, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think we all bring stuff to the therapy room that we can make mistakes about. And when it comes to financial therapy, I think therapists are going to struggle with the money piece just because we aren't trained on it, but not to let that be a barrier from engaging with or talking about it. Because again, if what we can do is just say like, look, I thought what I said last session was a really wise thing, and I'll be really transparent that I spent some time after you left thinking about it. And I think what I was trying to say was XYZ, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of stepping in it with a bit of humility can be helpful. And you can also say like, wow, this is outside of my wheelhouse, right? There are plenty of times where we have clients and we start getting into the work and we go, the presenting problem that you brought to me is actually not what I'm seeing show up. Let me refer you to somebody who can really care for you in a way that I'm unable to. And that's okay too.
You have something for our listeners to help get them kind of going in this direction of being more comfortable talking about money.
I do. So I wrote a book. It's called, it's the Financial Anxiety Solution, and it is a workbook, which means that there are lots of exercises that you can do as a therapist, but you can also bring them to your clients. It's based on information from various interventions like CBT and motivational interviewing. So there are a lot of things that therapists will find familiar and comfortable, but there's also, money in it because that's what it's about. So if anybody purchases my book and they hear about me or my work on a podcast like this one, they can get a free video training on values-based spending and saving. So all you have to do is go to my website, mindmoneybalance.com/podcast, and all of the information is there. So you can grab that book and you can get access to a free video training.
And we will include all of that information in our show notes. You can find that on our website, mtsgpodcast.com. And while you're there, click on over to the Therapy Reimagined conference. And once again, Lindsay is going to be joining us and talking about all this kind of financial therapy stuff. We're really excited to have her, as well as everybody else that's coming. It's virtual this year, so join us and get your CEs. Our friends over at Simple Practice are helping us do that. So check out all of the CE information on the website as well. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy and Lindsay Bryan-Podvin.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Hushmail.
Hush Secure Forms make emailing securely with your clients and using HIPAA-compliant web forms very easy. You can start with one of their web form templates and customize it to reflect your practice, or use their drag and drop form builder to build beautiful forms from scratch. No need for extra services to get your form signed. Hushmail provides email, web forms, and e-signatures that work seamlessly together in one package to get the job done. Great for contact forms, health histories, client experience surveys, referrals, and screenings. Among other popular forms, Hushmail's template directory includes a COVID-19 screening questionnaire and several screening forms, such as the PHQ-9 depression screening and the GAD-7 anxiety screening, which includes a score upon completion.
And as a Modern Therapist Survival Guide listener, you get a 10% lifetime discount. Just go to hushmail.com/therapy reimagined and sign up for the Hushmail for Healthcare plan that suits your practice. Hushmail has a plan for everyone.
Also, thanks to our sponsor, Kelly and Miranda of ZinnyMe.
Kelly and Miranda of ZinnyMe have been helping therapists from across the country and around the world grow, revamp, and launch profitable private practices that really help people, while also making sure therapists' lives stay in balance. Their award-winning and multiple-time sell-out business school bootcamp for therapists is the largest private practice resource on the planet and will transform your life and business whether you are 20-plus years in or you are starting from scratch.
They have the largest collection of free private practice resources for therapists. Go to ZinnyMe.com today and sign up for their free marketing masterclass and get access to 10-plus hours of free training and a free community for therapists that is not on Facebook.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.